The Nashville morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Reba McEntire's penthouse suite, casting long shadows across awards that gleamed like silent sentinels of success. Grammy Awards, Country Music Association trophies, and platinum plaques lined the walls, testimony to a career that had spanned decades and touched millions of hearts. Yet, as Reba stood before her vanity mirror, applying the last touches of makeup for another day of interviews, she felt an inexplicable emptiness gnawing at her chest. "Reba, we need to leave in 15 minutes." Daniel Crawford's voice echoed from the living room, carrying that familiar urgency that had become the soundtrack to her life. Her manager's tone was always the same: efficient, business-focused, and tinged with the perpetual stress of keeping a country music icon's schedule on track. "I'll be right there, Daniel," she called back, though her reflection seemed to mock her enthusiasm. At 58, Reba McEntire had achieved everything a country artist could dream of. Her latest album had debuted at #1. Her tour was selling out venues across the nation, and her brand was stronger than ever. So why did she feel like she was suffocating in her own success? She walked into the spacious living room where Daniel was pacing, his phone pressed to his ear while juggling what appeared to be 3 different conversations. His gray hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccable, but the stress lines around his eyes told the story of someone who lived and breathed the entertainment industry's relentless pace. "Yes, we can move the Phoenix interview to Thursday, but absolutely not the Los Angeles Times piece. That's locked in," Daniel was saying into his phone. He looked up at Reba and mouthed, "2 minutes," before returning to his conversation. Jennifer Blake, Reba's personal assistant, sat at the dining table with her laptop open, surrounded by papers, contracts, and what looked like a small mountain of fan mail. Jennifer was 28, ambitious, and had been with Reba for 3 years. She had that eager efficiency of someone who believed that if she worked hard enough, she could control every variable in her boss's complicated life. "Good morning, Reba," Jennifer said, without looking up from her screen. "I've rearranged your afternoon schedule to accommodate the radio interview in San Antonio. The car will pick you up at 2 p.m. sharp after we land." Reba poured herself a cup of coffee from the silver service set on the kitchen island, the bitter liquid providing a momentary comfort against the morning's mechanical routine. "Jennifer, remind me again why we're doing a radio interview in San Antonio when we could be preparing for tomorrow's concert in Houston?" "Brand visibility," Daniel interjected, having finished his call. "The San Antonio market represents a significant demographic, and that particular station reaches into Mexico. We're trying to expand your international presence. Remember?" The word Mexico struck something in Reba's mind, though she couldn't quite place why. Perhaps it was the mention of reaching beyond borders, of touching lives in places where her music might mean something different, something more than chart positions and sales figures. "Speaking of Mexico," Jennifer added, scrolling through her tablet, "there's been a request for you to visit an orphanage in Tijuana next week. It's part of a charity initiative that several country artists are participating in. The publicity would be fantastic. Human interest stories, international goodwill, great photo opportunities." Daniel's eyes lit up with the calculating gleam of someone who could already see the headlines. "That's brilliant, Jennifer. Reba McEntire, country music's sweetheart, bringing joy to underprivileged children. The optics are perfect, especially with the Hispanic market we're trying to reach." "Optics," Reba repeated quietly, the word tasting strange in her mouth. She realized that somewhere along the way, her life had become about optics rather than genuine connection. When had helping children become a strategic marketing decision rather than a simple act of kindness? "The timing works perfectly," Jennifer continued, oblivious to Reba's internal struggle. "We'll have Robert Mitchell coordinate everything. He's the American director who runs the Casa de Esperanza orphanage there. Used to be a Hollywood executive before he had his midlife crisis and decided to save the world. Very photogenic facility, well managed, and the kids are adorable. Reba set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary, the porcelain clicking against the granite countertop. Jennifer, these are children, not props for a photo shoot. Of course! Jennifer backpedaled quickly. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant that the visit would generate positive coverage while actually helping the children. It's a win-win situation. Daniel checked his Rolex and clapped his hands together. Ladies, we need to move. The plane is waiting, and we have a tight schedule today. Reba, your interview talking points are in your bag. Remember to mention the new single, the upcoming tour dates, and keep steering the conversation back to the music. As they gathered their belongings and headed toward the elevator, Reba caught another glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her was polished, professional, and perfectly crafted for public consumption. Her red hair was styled in soft waves that caught the light just right. Her makeup was flawless, and her outfit, a carefully selected combination of approachable and elegant, had been chosen by a team of stylists who understood how to market authenticity. But authenticity couldn't be manufactured, could it? As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, where their black SUV waited, Reba found herself thinking about that orphanage in Mexico. Not about the publicity opportunities or the strategic market expansion, but about the children Jennifer had mentioned. What were their stories? What dreams did they carry in their hearts? When was the last time she had connected with someone who didn't know her as Reba McEntire, country music superstar, but simply as a person who cared? The SUV's leather seats enveloped her in familiar luxury as Daniel continued making calls and Jennifer typed rapidly on her laptop. Through the tinted windows, Nashville's skyline passed by in a blur of glass and steel. A city built on dreams and ambitions that seemed simultaneously close and impossibly distant. Daniel, Reba said suddenly, interrupting his phone conversation about radio market demographics. I want to visit that orphanage. He covered his phone's mouthpiece and looked at her with surprise. Of course, Reba. Jennifer's already working on the logistics for next week. No, she said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. I want to visit because I want to visit. Not because it's good for my image or because it will help us break into new markets. I want to go because there are children there who might need to know that someone cares about them. Daniel and Jennifer exchanged a look that Reba had seen countless times before. The slightly concerned expression of handlers who worried that their carefully managed star might be developing inconvenient principles. That's wonderful, Reba, Daniel said carefully. Your heart has always been in the right place. And of course, the fact that it aligns with our strategic goals is just a bonus. But as their vehicle merged onto the highway toward the airport, Reba wondered if her heart had been in the right place for quite some time. Success had a way of insulating you from the world, of surrounding you with people whose job it was to agree with you and shield you from anything that might disrupt your carefully maintained trajectory. When was the last time someone had challenged her, or surprised her, or shown her something she'd never seen before? The private jet was waiting on the tarmac, its pristine exterior reflecting the morning sun like a metal bird poised for flight. As Reba climbed the steps, she found herself thinking not about the interviews waiting in San Antonio or the concert in Houston, but about a place called Casa de Esperanza, House of Hope, and wondering if she might find there something she hadn't even realized she'd been looking for. The Gulfstream G450 hummed steadily at 35,000 feet. Its luxury cabin a cocoon of leather, mahogany, and muted conversations. Reba sat in her usual seat by the window, watching the Texas landscape unfold below like a patchwork quilt of farms and cities. Daniel was across the aisle, deep in conversation with someone from the record label about upcoming single releases, while Jennifer worked feverishly on her laptop, no doubt coordinating the dozens of moving pieces that comprised Reba's existence. "The San Antonio interview went perfectly," Jennifer said, looking up from her screen with satisfaction. "They loved the new single, and the host asked all the right questions. The station manager even said they'd like to have you back for their annual country music festival." Reba nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. The radio interview had been pleasant enough. The host was knowledgeable and respectful. The questions were predictable, and she'd delivered her talking points with the practiced ease of someone who could discuss her career on autopilot. But as they'd driven away from the station, she'd noticed a homeless veteran holding a cardboard sign at a traffic light. For just a moment, their eyes had met through the tinted window, and she'd seen something there that made her chest tighten. A recognition of shared humanity that cut through all the barriers of fame and circumstance. "There's been a slight change in plans," Daniel announced, closing his phone and turning to face them. "We've got some weather moving into Houston. Nothing serious, but the venue wants to push tonight's sound check back 2 hours to be safe." "That gives us some extra time," Jennifer said, already calculating. "We could add another interview, or maybe visit that children's hospital in Houston that's been requesting." "Actually," Reba interrupted, an idea forming that surprised even her. "How far are we from the Mexican border?" Daniel and Jennifer both looked at her with puzzlement. "About 3 hours by car," Daniel said slowly. "Why?" "I want to visit that orphanage today." The silence that followed was the kind that occurs when carefully laid plans suddenly encounter an immovable force. Daniel's expression shifted through several phases of concern, while Jennifer's fingers hovered motionless over her keyboard. "Reba," Daniel said in his most diplomatic voice, "that's a wonderful impulse, but we haven't prepared for that visit. There are logistics to consider, security arrangements to make, not to mention the publicity coordination." "I don't want publicity coordination," Reba said firmly. "I want to visit some children who could probably use a friendly face." "How complicated can that be?" Jennifer cleared her throat delicately. "There are border-crossing considerations, insurance issues with international travel, and we'd need to coordinate with the orphanage to make sure they're prepared for your arrival. Plus, your security detail would need time to scout the location and establish protocols." Reba felt a familiar frustration rising in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced countless times when simple human impulses collided with the complex machinery of celebrity management. What if I just want to be a person visiting other people? What if, just once, I don't need an advanced team and a photographer and a security detail? "Reba," Daniel said gently, "you haven't been just a person in about 25 years. That's not your fault. It's the reality of who you are and what you represent. People know you, they have expectations, and there are legal and safety considerations we can't ignore." She turned back to the window, watching the landscape scroll past below. Somewhere down there, people were living their lives without consulting publicists or checking with security teams before making spontaneous decisions. Somewhere down there, children were growing up in an orphanage, probably unaware that a country music star was flying overhead, debating whether visiting them would fit properly into a managed schedule. "What's the name of the director again?" she asked suddenly. Jennifer consulted her tablet. "Robert Mitchell. He's been running Casa de Esperanza for about 8 years. Former Hollywood executive turned humanitarian. The facility houses about 40 children, ages 3 to 16. They focus on education and family placement services." "Call him," Reba said. "Reba," Daniel began. "Call him, Jennifer. Tell him Reba McEntire would like to visit today if that's possible. Don't mention photographers or publicity. Just tell him I'd like to meet some of the children." Jennifer looked to Daniel for guidance, but Reba's expression made it clear that this wasn't a request open for negotiation. With obvious reluctance, Jennifer began searching for the orphanage's contact information. While Jennifer made the call, Reba found herself thinking about her own childhood in Oklahoma. Her parents hadn't been wealthy, but they'd been loving and present. She remembered coming home from school to the smell of her mother's cooking, remembered family dinners where everyone shared the events of their day, remembered feeling utterly secure in her place in the world. What must it feel like to grow up without that certainty, without that unconditional love that had formed the foundation of everything she'd built in her life? "I reached Mr. Mitchell," Jennifer announced, covering her phone's mouthpiece. "He's surprised, obviously, but he says they'd be honored to have you visit. He can arrange for the children to be cleaned up and gathered in the main hall, and he could have some of the staff prepare a small program of songs." "No program," Reba said quickly. "No gathering the children in a hall like I'm some kind of dignitary. I just want to meet them naturally, see how they live, maybe talk with some of them if they're interested." Jennifer relayed this information, her voice carrying the tone of someone trying to manage expectations on both ends of an unusual situation. After a few more minutes of conversation, she hung up. "He says that would be fine," she reported. "He seems like a genuinely nice man, actually. Very focused on what would be best for the children rather than what would make the biggest impression." Daniel was already on his phone with their pilot, discussing the logistics of diverting to a small airport near the border. "It's going to add complications to tomorrow's schedule," he warned, though his resignation suggested he recognized a battle he wasn't going to win. As the plane banked slightly, adjusting course toward their unexpected destination, Reba felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the nervous excitement of not knowing exactly what came next. Her life had become so scheduled, so predictable, that genuine surprise had been virtually eliminated. She couldn't remember the last time she'd deviated from a planned itinerary, much less on such a significant scale. "What should I tell the Houston venue about the delayed arrival?" Jennifer asked, her laptop balanced on her knees as she worked to salvage their original schedule. "Tell them I had something important to do," Reba replied, and for the first time in months, she felt like that was genuinely true. Through the small oval window, the landscape below was beginning to change. The familiar browns and greens of Texas giving way to the more arid terrain near the Mexican border. Somewhere ahead lay Casa de Esperanza and a group of children she'd never met, living lives that existed completely outside the bubble of her celebrity world. Daniel caught her eye and smiled. Not the professional smile of a manager whose client was generating good publicity, but the warmer smile of someone who remembered why he'd gotten into the music business in the first place. "You know what, Reba? This is probably the most spontaneous thing you've done in years. Maybe that's not such a bad thing." As their plane began its descent toward an airport that hadn't been on their flight plan that morning, Reba found herself wondering what she would say to children who had never heard her music, who didn't know her name, and who had no reason to be impressed by her success. For the first time in a very long time, she would have to be interesting simply because of who she was as a person. And she realized she wasn't entirely sure who that person was anymore. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump, and as they taxied toward the small terminal building, Reba caught sight of the border crossing in the distance. Beyond that checkpoint lay something completely unknown. And for the first time in years, that unknown felt like a gift rather than a threat. The dusty streets of Tijuana were a stark contrast to the polished luxury Reba had left behind at the airport. Their rented SUV navigated through neighborhoods where colorful murals adorned concrete walls, where children played soccer in vacant lots, and where the sounds of daily life, vendors calling out their wares, music spilling from open doorways, families calling to each other across narrow streets, created a symphony that was both foreign and somehow familiar. "Turn left at the next corner," Daniel said, consulting the GPS while trying to look comfortable in an environment that was clearly outside his usual experience. As Reba's manager, he was accustomed to five-star hotels and VIP entrances, not dusty back roads in a border town. Jennifer sat in the back seat, her phone pressed to her ear as she tried to manage the ripple effects of their unexpected detour. "Yes, I understand we're arriving late to Houston," she was saying. "But we'll make up the time tomorrow. Yes, I'll confirm as soon as we're back on schedule." Casa de Esperanza appeared around the final corner like an oasis of color and care in the midst of urban struggle. The orphanage was housed in a series of connected buildings painted in warm yellows and blues, with a large courtyard where children's artwork decorated every available wall. Bougainvillea climbed trellises, creating natural shade over picnic tables and playground equipment that showed signs of heavy but loving use. Robert Mitchell was waiting by the front gate, and Reba was struck immediately by how different he looked from what she'd expected. Instead of the polished Hollywood executive Jennifer had described, she saw a man in his early 50s wearing simple khaki pants and a cotton shirt, his graying hair slightly mussed, and his hands bearing the calluses of someone who wasn't afraid of physical work. His smile was genuine and unguarded, the expression of someone who had found his purpose and wasn't trying to impress anyone. "Ms. McEntire," he said, extending his hand as she stepped out of the SUV. "Welcome to Casa de Esperanza. I have to admit, when Jennifer called, I thought someone was playing a prank on us." "Please, call me Reba," she said, shaking his hand and immediately appreciating his firm, honest grip. "And thank you for accommodating such short notice. I hope we're not disrupting your regular routine too much." Robert laughed, a sound that carried easy warmth. "Disrupting routine is pretty much our daily reality here. 40 children between the ages of 3 and 16 don't really do routine very well. But they're excited to meet you, though I should warn you, most of them have no idea who you are beyond a nice lady from America who wanted to visit." "That," Reba said, with more relief than she'd expected to feel, "sounds absolutely perfect." As they walked through the courtyard toward the main building, Reba was struck by the atmosphere of the place. Despite the obvious limitations of resources, there was an unmistakable sense of home here. Children's laughter echoed from various directions, artwork covered every surface, and the staff members they passed greeted Robert with the easy familiarity of people who genuinely enjoyed working together. "We run things a little differently than some institutions," Robert explained as they paused to watch a group of older children helping younger ones with what appeared to be an art project. "We focus on creating as much of a family environment as possible. The children have chores, they help with the younger kids, and we encourage them to maintain connections with their culture and their stories." Daniel and Jennifer followed at a respectful distance, both clearly out of their element but trying to adapt. Jennifer had finally put away her phone, while Daniel seemed fascinated by the organized chaos around them. "How did you end up here?" Reba asked Robert as they entered the main building. The interior was simple but cheerful, with tile floors and white walls covered in children's artwork and family photos. "Midlife crisis turned into midlife clarity," Robert said with a self-deprecating smile. "I spent 25 years in Hollywood convincing people to buy things they didn't need with money they didn't have. Woke up one day and realized I was 47 years old and had never done anything that mattered to anyone but studio executives and shareholders." They paused in the doorway of a large room where about 15 children were engaged in various activities. Some reading, others playing board games, a few working on homework at a long table. The ages ranged from what looked like kindergarten to high school, and the atmosphere was that of siblings sharing space, rather than institutional supervision. "Isabella," Robert called gently to a small girl who was sitting alone by a window, drawing in a sketchbook. "Come meet our visitor." The child who looked up was perhaps 8 years old, with long, dark hair braided neatly down her back and large brown eyes that seemed to hold more gravity than should be possible in someone so young. She set down her pencil carefully and approached with the cautious politeness of a child who had learned to be wary of adult attention. "Isabella, this is Reba. She came from Nashville to visit us today." Isabella studied Reba with the serious consideration that children reserve for new adults in their world. "Hello," she said, in accented but clear English. "Are you a teacher?" "No, sweetheart," Reba said, kneeling down to Isabella's eye level. "I'm a singer. I came because I wanted to meet you and the other children here." "What do you sing about?" Isabella asked, her curiosity overcoming her initial shyness. The question caught Reba off guard. After decades of interviews and promotional appearances, she was accustomed to questions about her career, her latest album, her tour dates. But Isabella's question was simpler and somehow more complex. What did she sing about? "I sing about people's feelings," Reba said finally. "About love and missing people, and being happy, and sometimes being sad. About the things that happen in people's lives that matter to them." Isabella nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "I draw about feelings too," she said, holding up her sketchbook. "Would you like to see?" The drawing Isabella showed her was remarkable in its emotional sophistication. Created with colored pencils and crayons, it depicted what was clearly a family. 2 adults and a small child, standing in front of a house with a large tree in the yard. The figures were holding hands, and despite the simple artistic style, there was something poignant about the way the child had captured the sense of connection between them. "This is beautiful, Isabella," Reba said, genuinely moved. "Is this your family?" "It was my family," Isabella said matter-of-factly, "before the accident. Now I live here, but I still draw them sometimes because it helps me remember the good times." The simple directness of the statement hit Reba like a physical blow. There was no self-pity in Isabella's voice, no dramatic presentation of her loss, just the straightforward acknowledgement of a child who had learned to carry grief with dignity. "Tell me about the good times," Reba said softly. Isabella's face brightened immediately. "My mama used to sing when she cooked dinner. Not like professional singing. She wasn't very good. But she was happy, so her voice sounded happy too. And my papa taught me to draw. He was an artist, and he said I had the eye. That means I could see beauty in regular things." As Isabella continued talking about her parents, describing memories with the vivid detail that children bring to their most treasured experiences, Reba felt something shifting inside her chest. This little girl had lost everything that mattered most to her, yet she spoke about beauty and happiness and the good times with genuine joy. There was no bitterness, no anger at the unfairness of life, just acceptance and a determination to honor her parents' memory by continuing to find beauty in the world. "Isabella," Reba said, "would you show me more of your drawings? I'd love to see them." For the next hour, Isabella became Reba's guide through her artistic world. Each drawing told a story, some of her memories with her parents, others of life at the orphanage, still others that seemed to spring from pure imagination. There were pictures of the other children, of Robert and the staff, of dreams about families and futures and places she'd never been but hoped to see someday. What struck Reba most profoundly was Isabella's complete lack of awareness of who she was supposed to be impressed by. The little girl treated her simply as an interested adult, someone who cared enough to ask questions and listen to the answers. There were no requests for autographs, no excitement about meeting someone famous, Just the genuine pleasure of sharing something she loved with someone who appreciated it. "Reba," Isabella said as she showed a drawing of children playing in the courtyard, "do you have children?" "No, sweetheart, I don't." "Do you want children?" The question, asked with a child's innocent directness, struck deeper than Reba was prepared for. In the rush of career demands and public obligations, she'd pushed aside many personal questions that had once seemed important. The possibility of children had been discussed and dismissed years ago as incompatible with touring schedules and recording commitments. I'm not sure, Isabella. I've been so busy with my singing that I haven't thought about it very much." Isabella considered this with the seriousness she brought to all their conversation. "I think you would be a good mama," she said finally. "You listen with your whole face, not just your ears. That's important for children." The observation was so perceptive, so genuinely insightful, that Reba felt tears prick at her eyes. When was the last time someone had noticed how she listened? When was the last time anyone had paid attention to her qualities as a person, rather than as a performer? "Thank you, Isabella," she managed. "That might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time." As the afternoon wore on, Reba found herself drawn into the natural rhythm of life at Casa de Esperanza. She helped with homework, played games, listened to stories, and gradually met most of the children. Each child had their own personality, their own story, their own way of navigating the world. Some were outgoing and immediately attached themselves to the novel presence of a visitor, while others hung back, observing with careful eyes, before deciding whether to trust. But it was Isabella who remained her constant companion, the little girl who had somehow appointed herself as Reba's guide to this world she'd never imagined. And with each passing hour, Reba felt something happening inside her that was both unsettling and deeply moving. She was remembering what it felt like to matter to someone not because of what she could do for them or what she represented, but simply because of who she was in that moment. As evening approached, the orphanage settled into its dinner routine. Reba found herself in the large dining hall, surrounded by the controlled chaos of 40 children navigating the complex social dynamics of shared meals. The older children helped serve the younger ones. Conversations flowed in a mixture of Spanish and English. And the atmosphere was remarkably similar to family dinners she remembered from her own childhood. Noisy, affectionate, and punctuated by the kind of minor disputes that arise when people who care about each other spend all their time together. Isabella had claimed the seat next to Reba and was explaining the orphanage's elaborate system for chore assignments, while carefully arranging her rice and beans into separate sections on her plate. On Tuesdays, I help with laundry, and on Fridays, I read to the little ones during quiet time. Carlos, he's 14, he helps Robert with the budget because he's really good at math. "It sounds like everyone has important jobs," Reba observed, watching the easy cooperation around her. "Robert says we're not guests here. We're family," Isabella explained. "Family members help each other. And when people adopt us, we already know how to be helpful in a family." The casual mention of adoption sent a pang through Reba's chest. These children lived with the constant awareness that their current situation was temporary, that they were waiting for permanent families who might or might not come. Yet Isabella spoke about it without sadness, simply as another fact of her existence. "Do you think about being adopted?" Reba asked gently. Isabella shrugged with the philosophical acceptance of a child who had learned not to invest too heavily in outcomes beyond her control. "Sometimes, but I'm 8 now, and most people want babies or little children. Robert says the right family will come when it's supposed to, and until then, we have each other." Daniel and Jennifer had been seated at the adult table with Robert and several staff members and Reba could see them engaging in what appeared to be an animated discussion about the orphanage's operations. Jennifer, in particular, seemed fascinated by the logistics of managing such a complex household, while Daniel was asking detailed questions about funding and sustainability. "Reba," Isabella said, interrupting her observations, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Are you lonely?" The question was so unexpected, so piercingly direct, that Reba nearly dropped her fork. In all her years of interviews and public appearances, no one had ever asked her anything so fundamentally honest about her emotional state. "What makes you ask that, Isabella? You get sad around your eyes, sometimes, even when you're smiling," Isabella said, with the matter-of-fact observation skills that children often possess. "And when you talk about your singing, you sound like you're talking about work instead of something you love. I know that feeling." The honesty of the observation cut through Reba like a blade. Here was an 8-year-old girl who had lost everything, yet possessed the emotional intelligence to recognize loneliness in someone who was supposedly living the dream. "You're very wise, Isabella," Reba said softly. "Yes, sometimes I am lonely. Even when I'm surrounded by people, sometimes I feel like nobody really knows who I am when I'm not singing." "That's because they only see the outside part of you," Isabella said, with the certainty of someone who understood the difference between public faces and private hearts. "But the inside part is the part that matters for friendship." Tratui. Around them, the dinner routine continued. But Reba felt as if she and Isabella existed in a bubble of honesty that was both uncomfortable and deeply necessary. This child had somehow managed to ask the questions that adults had been too polite, too impressed, or too intimidated to ask. "Isabella, can I tell you something?" Reba asked. "Yes. Today, spending time with you and the other children here, I've felt more like myself than I have in years. You've reminded me that there are more important things than being famous or successful." Isabella nodded as if this made perfect sense. "My papa used to say that the most important thing about a person is whether they make other people feel good about themselves. He said talent is a gift, but kindness is a choice." The wisdom of this simple statement, coming from a child who had every reason to be bitter about life's unfairness, left Reba momentarily speechless. She realized that she'd spent so many years focused on using her talent to build her career that she'd almost forgotten the choice to be kind simply for its own sake. "Your papa sounds like he was a very wise man," Reba managed. "He was," Isabella said with quiet pride. "And Mama always said that the best way to honor people we love is to become the kind of person they hoped we would be." As dinner wound down and the children began their evening chores and activities, Reba found herself helping Isabella clear tables and wash dishes. Simple, domestic tasks that felt surprisingly grounding after years of being insulated from such ordinary responsibilities by assistants and staff. "Reba," Isabella said as they dried plates together, "are you going to go back to your singing tomorrow?" "Yes, sweetheart. I have concerts and recordings and all sorts of things scheduled. Will you remember us?" The question was asked without accusation or self-pity, but it hit Reba with tremendous force. How many people had she met over the years in similar circumstances? Charity events, meet and greets, promotional appearances, who had made genuine impressions on her, only to fade into the blur of managed experiences as her schedule moved forward. "Isabella," Reba said, kneeling down to meet the child's eyes directly, "I will never forget you. You've taught me something today that I didn't even know I needed to learn." "What did I teach you?" "You taught me the difference between being famous and being important. And you reminded me that the best part of who we are isn't what we do for work. It's how we treat the people we meet along the way." Isabella smiled then, the first completely unguarded smile Reba had seen from her all day. "I'm glad you came to visit us, Reba. Not because you're a singer, but because you're good at listening." As evening settled over Casa de Esperanza and the children began their bedtime routines, Reba walked through the courtyard with Robert, reflecting on a day that had turned out to be nothing like what she'd expected and everything she hadn't realized she needed. "She's remarkable, isn't she?" Robert said, noticing Reba's thoughtful mood. "They all are," Reba replied. "But yes, Isabella is. She's extraordinary. How does a child who's lost so much manage to be so wise about what matters?" "Children are remarkably resilient when they're given love and stability," Robert explained. "Isabella came to us about 2 years ago, and it took months for her to trust anyone. But once she felt safe, her natural empathy and intelligence began to flourish. She's become one of our natural leaders. The other children look up to her, and she takes that responsibility seriously." They paused by the gate where their SUV was waiting. Daniel and Jennifer had already loaded their belongings, and both looked tired but oddly energized by their unexpected adventure. "Robert," Reba said suddenly, "what would it take for me to help more than just today? I mean, really help. Not just write a check or do a photo opportunity." Robert studied her carefully, seeming to weigh whether her question came from genuine commitment or momentary emotion. "That depends on what kind of help you're talking about. We need sustainable funding, certainly, but we also need advocates, people who understand what we're trying to accomplish and can help others understand it too." "I want to do both," Reba said, with a certainty that surprised her. "I want to be involved in a way that matters, not just in a way that looks good for publicity." As they said their goodbyes and prepared to return to the airport, Isabella appeared at Reba's side with a small wrapped package. "This is for you," she said shyly, "to remember today." Reba unwrapped the gift carefully. Inside was one of Isabella's drawings, not one of her family memories or dreams of the future, but a simple sketch of 2 women sitting together, clearly engaged in conversation. The older woman was unmistakably meant to be Reba, while the younger was obviously Isabella herself. At the bottom, in careful child's handwriting, were the words, "Friends, listen with their hearts." "Isabella," Reba whispered, feeling tears she hadn't expected, "this is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." "It's true, isn't it?" Isabella said. "We're friends now?" "We're friends," Reba confirmed, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As their vehicle pulled away from Casa de Esperanza, Reba pressed her face to the window to wave goodbye to the children who had gathered to see them off. Isabella stood at the front of the group, waving with the same serious concentration she brought to everything else, and Reba felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. For the first time in years, she was leaving somewhere having gained something more valuable than she had given. And as the lights of Tijuana faded behind them, she began to understand that real success might have less to do with chart positions and more to do with the hearts that remembered you after you were gone. 3 months later, the backstage area of Nashville's Grand Ole Opry hummed with its familiar pre-show energy. Reba stood in her dressing room, applying the final touches of makeup that would transform her into the polished performer 60,000 fans expected to see. But as she looked at her reflection, her eyes caught on something new. Isabella's drawing, now framed and holding a permanent place on her dressing room vanity, alongside family photos and career mementos. The child's words echoed in her mind. "Friends, listen with their hearts." Over the past 3 months, those words had become a compass guiding decisions that had surprised everyone in her professional orbit, including herself. "5 minutes, Miss Reba," came the call from the stage manager. "Thank you," she called back, But instead of the pre-show anxiety that had become routine over the years, she felt something different tonight. A sense of purpose that went beyond entertaining an audience. Daniel knocked and entered, his expression carrying the mixture of pride and bewilderment that had characterized their relationship since her return from Mexico. "The crowd is incredible tonight, Reba. Complete sellout. And the energy out there is electric. Are you ready?" "More ready than I've been in years," she said, surprising them both with her conviction. Over the past months, Reba had quietly but systematically restructured her approach to her career. She'd reduced her touring schedule by 30%, using the freed time to make regular visits to Casa de Esperanza and to establish the Voices of Hope Foundation, an organization focused not on generating publicity, but on creating sustainable support systems for children in institutional care across North America. Jennifer appeared in the doorway with her tablet, but her role had evolved too. Instead of managing only Reba's professional obligations, she now coordinated the Foundation's activities, working directly with Robert Mitchell and other directors to identify needs and develop programs that made actual differences in children's lives. "The Foundation report came in this afternoon," Jennifer said, her voice carrying genuine excitement rather than professional efficiency. "Casa de Esperanza's new educational program is exceeding all expectations. 6 children have been accepted to university programs, and 12 more are in advanced placement courses. Isabella's art portfolio was selected for the regional youth exhibition." At the mention of Isabella's name, Reba's smile deepened. The little girl had become more than a memory from a transformative day. She had become a pen pal, an inspiration, and something very close to the daughter Reba had never thought she wanted. Their letters, written in English and Spanish with drawings accompanying the words, had become the highlight of Reba's weeks. "How is she doing with the new family?" Reba asked. "Wonderfully," Jennifer reported. "Catherine Wells and her husband David officially finalized the adoption last week. Isabella sent you this." Jennifer handed over a manila envelope that had been carefully decorated with stickers and Isabella's distinctive artistic touches. Inside was a photograph showing Isabella with her new parents, Catherine, the journalist who had originally accompanied Reba to the orphanage and had been so moved by the experience that she'd begun the adoption process immediately, and David, Catherine's husband, who taught high school art. With the photograph was a letter written in Isabella's improved but still charmingly careful English. "Dear Reba, today I have a mama and papa again. Catherine says I can call her Mama Kate. And David says I can teach him to draw better because he is not as good as my first papa was. But he tries very hard and makes me laugh. We are going to visit the orphanage every weekend, so I can see my friends and help with the little children. Mama Kate says this is important because family means the people who love you, not just the people who live in your house. I am still drawing, and now I have my own room with a big window for good light. I drew a picture of you singing, and I hope someday I can come to hear you in person. Thank you for being my friend when I needed one. You taught me that famous people can also be good people, and that's important to know. With love and friendship, Isabella Rodriguez Wells." 2 minutes, called the stage manager. Reba folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her guitar case alongside her other treasured keepsakes. As she walked toward the stage, Daniel fell into step beside her. "You know," he said quietly, "when you first told me you wanted to change how we did things, I was worried you were having some kind of crisis that would hurt your career." "And now?" Reba asked, adjusting her guitar strap. "Now I think you were having the kind of crisis that saved it," Daniel replied. "Your music has more depth now, more authenticity. The audiences can feel it, the critics have noticed it, and frankly, you seem happier than you've been in years." It was true. The songs Reba had written since returning from Casa de Esperanza carried a different emotional weight, a connection to real human experience that had been missing from her work without her realizing it. Her latest single, More Than Fame, inspired directly by her conversations with Isabella, had climbed the charts, not because of marketing strategies, but because it resonated with listeners who recognized its genuine emotion. As she stepped onto the Opry stage and faced the sea of faces in the historic venue, Reba felt the familiar rush of connection with her audience. But tonight, that connection felt different, deeper, more purposeful. These weren't just fans consuming her entertainment. They were people with their own stories, their own struggles, their own moments of loneliness and hope. "Good evening, Nashville," she called out, and the crowd's enthusiastic response washed over her like a warm embrace. "Before I sing for you tonight," she continued, "I want to tell you about a little girl named Isabella, who taught me something important about what it means to be successful." The audience settled into attentive quiet, sensing that this was going to be more than the usual between-songs banter. 3 months ago, I visited an orphanage in Mexico, and I met a child who had lost everything that mattered most to her. But instead of being bitter, instead of being angry at the world, she had chosen to find beauty wherever she could, to help other children who were scared, and to believe that kindness matters more than recognition. Reba's voice carried easily through the venue, but more than that, it carried conviction that reached every corner of the auditorium. She asked me if I was lonely, and I had to admit that sometimes I was. But she taught me that loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about forgetting that we're all connected by the things that make us human. Our joys, our sorrows, our hopes, and our love for each other. She strummed her guitar gently, beginning the opening chords of More Than Fame. This song is for Isabella, and for every child who's waiting for someone to tell them they matter. But it's also for every one of us who's forgotten that our real worth isn't measured by what we achieve, but by how we treat each other along the way. As the familiar melody filled the Opry, Reba felt a completeness she had never experienced before on stage. The song told the story of her journey from the golden cage of celebrity to the recognition that authentic connection was more valuable than any award or accolade. But more than that, it was a promise to Isabella, to the children at Casa de Esperanza, and to herself that she would never again mistake being famous for being important. The audience's response was unlike anything she had experienced in her career. The standing ovation seemed to go on forever. But more than the applause, Reba could see in their faces the recognition of something real, something that mattered beyond entertainment. As she took her bow and prepared to continue the concert, Reba's eyes caught a sign in the front row. "Thank you for reminding us that fame is what others give you, but purpose is what you give yourself." Later, as the final notes of her encore faded, and she walked off the Opry stage for what felt like the first time, as her complete, authentic self, Reba found Daniel and Jennifer waiting in the wings with expressions of profound satisfaction. That, Daniel said, was not just a concert. That was a statement about who you are and what you stand for. "And the foundation?" Reba asked. "Already receiving donation pledges from tonight's audience," Jennifer reported. "But more importantly, we're getting messages from people who want to volunteer, who want to get involved in ways that matter." 6 months later, Reba stood once again in the courtyard of Casa de Esperanza. But this time, she wasn't alone. 25 other country music artists had joined her for the first annual Voices of Hope benefit concert, an event that had raised enough money to fund educational programs, healthcare services, and adoption support services for children throughout Mexico and the southern United States. But the real highlight of the day wasn't the music or the money raised. It was watching Isabella, now settled into her new family, but still a regular volunteer at the orphanage, teaching art to a new group of children who had arrived scared and uncertain about their futures. "She's going to be a teacher someday," Catherine Wells told Reba, as they watched Isabella patiently help a 6-year-old boy learn to mix colors. "She has this gift for making people feel safe enough to try new things." "She had that gift when I met her," Reba replied. "She made me feel safe enough to remember who I wanted to be." As the sun set over Tijuana, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that Isabella would have loved to capture in her drawings, Reba reflected on the journey that had brought her from a golden cage of her own making to this moment of purpose and connection. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Daniel. "New York Times wants to do a feature on the foundation. Rolling Stone wants to interview you about your career transformation. 3 record labels are asking about your next album." But instead of the automatic flutter of professional anxiety these messages would have once triggered, Reba simply smiled and put her phone away. Those things would be handled in due time, but right now she was exactly where she needed to be, surrounded by children whose laughter reminded her daily that success wasn't about being seen by millions of people, but about truly seeing the people right in front of you. Isabella approached with a new drawing, this one showing the concert stage with all the performers. But in the foreground, she had drawn the audience of children, their faces bright with joy and hope. "For your dressing room," Isabella said, offering the drawing with the same serious generosity that had marked their first meeting. "It's perfect," Reba said, accepting the gift and feeling, for perhaps the first time in her life, that this simple statement was completely true. As the evening wound down and the visiting musicians prepared to return to their various careers and commitments, Reba lingered in the courtyard, reluctant to leave the place that had taught her the difference between being famous and being important. Tomorrow she would return to Nashville, to recording sessions and tour planning, and all the complex machinery of a career that now had genuine purpose behind it. But tonight, she was simply Reba, not a country music superstar, not a brand or a marketing strategy, but a woman who had learned from a wise child that the most important song anyone can sing is the one that reminds others they are not alone. And as Isabella ran off to help with bedtime stories for the youngest children, her laughter echoing through the courtyard like the most beautiful music Reba had ever heard, she knew that this was what success actually sounded like. Not the roar of crowds or the ring of cash registers, but the quiet joy of people who felt seen, valued, and loved. The story would continue tomorrow and the next day, and for years to come. But the song of purpose that had begun with a simple question, "Are you lonely?" would play on, connecting hearts across borders and reminding everyone who heard it that we are all more than our fame, more than our achievements, and infinitely more valuable than we sometimes remember to believe.